Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to you on our third episode about who is Muhammad. Today we will talk about the beginnings of Quran. Muhammad began to pray alone in a cave named Hira on Mount Jabal al-Nur near Mecca for several weeks every year. Islamic tradition holds that during one of his visits to that cave in the year 610, the angel Gabriel appeared to him and commanded Muhammad to recite verses that would be included in the Quran. Consensus exists that the first Quranic words revealed were the beginning of Surah. Muhammad was deeply distressed upon receiving his first revelations. After returning home, Muhammad was consoled and reassured by Khadija and her Christian cousin Waraqa ibn Nawfal. He also feared that others would dismiss his claims as being possessed. Shia tradition states Muhammad was not surprised or frightened at Gabriel's appearance. Rather, he welcomed the angel as if he was expected. The initial revelation was followed by a 3-year pause, during which Muhammad felt depressed and further gave himself to prayers and spiritual practices. When the revelations resumed, he was reassured and commanded to begin preaching. Sahih Bukhari narrates Muhammad describing his revelations as sometimes it's revealed like the ringing of bell. Aisha reported, I saw the Prophet being inspired divinely on a very cold day and noticed the sweat dropping from his forehead as the inspiration was over. According to which, these descriptions may be considered genuine since they are unlikely to have been forged by later Muslims. Muhammad was confident that he could distinguish his own thoughts from these messages. According to the Quran, one of the main rules of Muhammad is to warn the unbelievers of their eschatological punishment. The Quran didn't explicitly refer to the Judgment Day, but provided examples from the history of extinct communities and warns Muhammad's contemporaries of similar calamities. Muhammad didn't only warn those who rejected God's revelation, but also dispensed good news for those who abandoned evil, listening to the divine words and serving God. Muhammad's mission also involves preaching monotheism. The Quran commands Muhammad to proclaim and praise the name of his Lord and instructs him not to worship idols or associate other deities with God. The key themes of the early Quranic verses included the responsibility of man towards his Creator, the resurrection of the dead, God's final judgment, followed by vivid descriptions of the tortures in hell and the pleasures in paradise, and the signs of God in all aspects of life. Religious duties required of the believers at this time were few: belief in God, asking for forgiveness of sins, offering frequent prayers, assisting others, particularly those in need, rejecting cheating, and the love of wealth. According to Muslim tradition, Muhammad's wife Khadija was the first to believe he was a prophet. She was followed by Muhammad's 10-year-old cousin Ali ibn Abi Talib, close friend Abu Bakr, and adopted son Zayd. Around 613, Muhammad began to preach to the public. Most Meccans ignored and mocked him. though a few became his followers. There were three main groups of early converts to Islam: younger brothers and sons of great merchants, people who had fallen out of the first rank in their tribe or failed to attain it, and the weak, mostly unprotected foreigners. According to Ibn Sa'd, opposition in Mecca started when Muhammad delivered verses that condemned idol worship and the polytheism practiced by the Meccan forefathers. However, the Quranic exegesis maintains that it began as Muhammad started public preaching. As his followers increased, Muhammad became a threat to the local tribes and rulers of the city, whose wealth rested upon the Kaaba, the focal point of Meccan religious life that Muhammad threatened to overthrow. Muhammad's denunciation of the Meccan traditional religion was especially offensive to his own tribe, the Quraysh, as they were the guardians of the Kaaba. Powerful merchants attempt to convince Muhammad to abandon his preaching. He was offered admission to the inner circle of merchants as well as an advantageous marriage. He refused both of these offers. Tradition records at great length the persecution and ill treatment towards Muhammad and his followers. A slave of prominent Meccan leader Abu Jahl is famous as the first martyr of Islam, killed with a spear by her master when she refused to give up her faith. Bilal, another Muslim slave, was tortured by Umayyah ibn Khalaf, who placed a heavy rock on his chest to force his conversion. In 615, some of Muhammad's followers immigrated to the Ethiopian kingdom of Aksum and founded a small colony under the protection of the Christian Ethiopian emperor Ashama ibn Abjar. Ibn Sa'd mentions two separate migrations. According to him, most of the Muslims returned to Mecca prior to Hijrah, while a second group rejoined them in Medina. Ibn Hisham and Tabari, however, only talk about one migration to Ethiopia. These accounts agree that Meccan persecution played a major role in Muhammad's decision to suggest that a number of his followers seek refuge among the Christians in Abyssinia. According to the famous letter of Urwa preserved in Al-Tabari, the majority of Muslims returned to their native town as Islam gained strength and high-ranking Meccans such as Omar and Hamza converted. However, there is a completely different story on the reason why the Muslim returned from Ethiopia to Mecca. According to this account, initially mentioned by Al-Waqidi, then rehearsed by Ibn Sa'd and Tabari, but not by Ibn Hisham and not by Ibn Ishaq. Muhammad, desperately hoping for an accommodation with his tribe, pronounced a verse acknowledging the existence of three Meccan goddesses considered to be the daughters of Allah. Muhammad retracted the verses the next day at the behest of Gabriel, claiming that the verses were whispered by the devil himself. Instead, a ridicule of these gods was offered. This episode, known as the story of cranes, is also known as Satanic verses. According to the story, this led to great or general reconciliation between Muhammad and the Meccans, and the Abyssinia Muslims began to return home. When they arrived, Gabriel had informed Muhammad that the two verses were not part of the revelation, but had been inserted by Satan. Notable scholars at that time argued against the historic authenticity of these verses and the story itself on various grounds. Al-Waqidi was severely criticized by Islamic scholars such as Malik ibn Anas, Al-Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Al-Nasa'i, Al-Bukhari, Abu Dawood, An-Nawawi, and others as a liar and a forger. Later, the incident received some acceptance among certain groups, though strong objections to it continued onwards past the 10th century. The objections continued until rejection of these verses, and the story itself eventually became the only acceptable Orthodox Muslim position. In 616 or 617, the leaders of Makhzum and Banu Abd Shams, two important Quraysh clans, declared a public boycott against Banu Hashim, their commercial rival, to pressure it into withdrawing its protection of Muhammad. The boycott lasted 3 years, but eventually collapsed as it failed in its objective. During this time, Muhammad was able to preach only during the holy pilgrimage month, in which all hostilities between Arabs were suspended.